Ladies and Gorons, it's official. The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild is getting a sequel. For now, we'll just call it Breath of the Wild 2, but it's probably going to be called The Legend of Zelda Ganon's Awakening or some crap like that. I don't know. Either way, this is exciting, not just because it is a brand new Zelda game in general, but because it is actually a sequel to the most ambitious Zelda game since Ocarina of Time. While Breath of the Wild was indeed a very ambitious game, it was also pretty flawed, and I hope the sequel addresses some of these issues and fixes them. Matter of fact, I have a list right here of all the things I would like to see fixed in Breath of the Wild 2. So let's take a look. Wow. This is perfect!
Hold on there, Joey. I think you might just be able to add a few more features to that list.
Well, if it isn't my good friend and Zelda YouTuber, Rumpf.
What was that?
I said, well, if it isn't my good friend and Zelda YouTuber, Rumpf.
It's RMFH, Joey. You just say the letters. It's not a word.
Nah, too many syllables. Anyway, enough about that. Let's get started with this list of top 5 things Breath of the Wild 2 absolutely needs. Let's make one thing abundantly clear. As much as some of you might have hated the weapon durability in Breath of the Wild, we deemed it as a necessary evil. It forced us to experiment with different kinds of weapons, and it gave the experience more variety. Using the same weapon over and over again throughout the entire game would have gotten stale. I know. I've played Skyrim. That said, the weapon durability system could have been implemented better. I've been replaying Breath of the Wild for the sake of videos like these, and I have to agree that weapons break way too soon. And save for a few weapons, there's no way to repair them if their durability is low. Now, there are some weapons hidden throughout the world that have enhanced durability. Some. The Breath of the Wild sequel should retain the weapon durability system to help add variety to the gameplay. But either all the weapons need to take significantly longer to break, or we need the option to repair them if they're on the verge of breaking. In an ideal world, both would be nice. And as for the Master Sword, just get rid of that stupid power meter. Seriously, it was the dumbest shit in Breath of the Wild, and we should be able to use it at all times. Does that contradict what I was saying earlier about how using the same weapon over and over would be boring? Maybe, but this is the Master Sword, not Master for a period of time, then I have to recharge Sword. Ugh, so bad.
Music is a very important part of every Zelda game, to the point where it's implemented as a gameplay feature in most every game. That said, the soundtrack in Breath of the Wild was lacking in some aspects. Does that mean the music was bad? Absolutely not. It just wasn't what we're used to hearing in Zelda games. Instead of the bombastic overworld themes like we got more somber and atmospheric tones. The only times we hear full-blown background music are when we take on enemies and enter places such as towns, shrines, and divine beasts. Even then, the music isn't that exhilarating or even memorable, save for the few tracks like The Lost Woods and that awesome boss fight with Monk Maz Koshai. Oh, and that amazing music from the release date trailer? Yeah, that's not in the final game. However, the style of Breath of the Wild soundtrack still has a place in the sequel. We just want the latter to have a healthy combination of the reserved soundtrack from Breath of the Wild and the bombastic soundtrack from previous Zelda games. We understand why the development team decided to go for the music style they did, but we as Zelda fans are way too nostalgic for better or worse, and we really miss the epicness from the older games. Whenever we ride our horse in the sequel, how about instead of hearing, we hear
Man, if there was one thing Breath of the Wild was missing, it was an actual threat. Which is a shame because there was so much potential to have the greatest villain and evil group in the entire franchise. Needless to say, that didn't happen. Let's start first though with the Yiga clan, the followers of Calamity Ganon. Before we met these guys, they were said to be the most cunning and evil traitors of the Sheikah tribe, only out to cause pain to those who don't follow the ways of Calamity Ganon. Instead, we got a bunch of bumbling nanjas who like bananas way too much and are being led by an absolute buffoon with a mad case of beer belly. Am I supposed to be intimidated by these cretins? All of that would have been forgiven though if the final battle with Ganon was as epic as we had hoped. Here was an intelligent creature, filled with rage, who single-handedly destroyed Hyrule with a plan so devastating the Hylians couldn't have possibly predicted it. There he stood, circulating Hyrule Castle for the past 100 years. You knew at some point you would have to build yourself up over a long journey to face him in a battle for the ages. Then lo and behold, you get the spider from It. What the fuck is this nonsense? It certainly doesn't help that Ganon never said a single word of dialogue in the first Zelda game to have voice acting. But what is this design, dude? To be fair, this was a pretty good boss battle, but the one after with Dark Beast Ganon was a complete joke. The villain in Breath of the Wild 2 needs to be infinitely more menacing than the Ganon we got in the last game. And if he has any followers like the Yiga clan, they need to be infinitely less stupid. Fortunately, the first trailer for the sequel already addresses this issue, because if that's not Ganondorf being resurrected, then I don't know who it is. All I know is he's got a sick head of hair and a massive set of chompers. Somebody get this dry boy a glass of water.
A Zelda game is nothing without its dungeons, having consistently been a part of the series ever since its inception. Even if a Zelda game doesn't have that much going for it in terms of story or world, it can be saved by its dungeon quality. Obviously, Breath of the Wild has many great aspects, but what it offers in the form of dungeons is not one of them. What it has is 120 shrines that act as mini dungeons and 4 divine beasts that act as main dungeons. If this was your first Zelda game, chances are you love the divine beasts, because they're indeed very well designed. They have great physics-based puzzles to make you think outside of the box, and you have to transform them to help you get to the end. The divine beasts are very cool inventions, but if you're a series veteran who has played just about every Zelda game before Breath of the Wild, you were probably disappointed with the lack of traditional dungeons. Yes, the divine beasts are neat, but they're also short, they all look similar, and the bosses at the end of them are dull and uninteresting. I guess the shrines were there to help fill the void the divine beasts left in our hearts, but they also have the problem of being very similar to each other, save for a few shrine quests. Still, the puzzles and challenges these shrines presented were awesome, and we wouldn't mind the same amount and type of these shrines returning in the sequel, as long as we get the traditional Zelda dungeons we've come to expect from the franchise. It seems that was also hinted at in the E3 trailer, if we assume the cave Link and Zelda are in is considered a dungeon. The closest thing we got to a traditional dungeon in Breath of the Wild was Hyrule Castle. It was massive with many nooks and crannies to explore, and an optional path to take. Keyword being optional. If the dungeons in the sequel were designed in a similar way, we wouldn't complain one bit. Before we get to number 1, Joey, should we give some honorable mentions?
Okay, let's see here. Better side quests, more and better voice acting, another province to explore, way less Korok seeds. What else?
How about the rain?
Oh my god. Please!
Breath of the Wild took a major step forward for the Zelda franchise in how it tells its stories, that being the introduction of voice acting. Some performances were better than others, but overall we were pleased with this and hope to see more voice acting in future Zelda stories. Unfortunately, the story they chose to introduce voice acting into was far from the best one in Zelda history. The story in Breath of the Wild was, for one, way too simple, but even worse, it felt disconnected from the players since most of the important events took place 100 years in the past. Most of the story in-game was told in flashbacks by other characters, or recalled by Link when visiting memory locations. Even the Champions Ballad DLC doesn't add much to the story, only giving you more flashbacks. Flashbacks are handy once in a while, but you can't design your entire story around them. This goes for any form of media, not just games.
This kind of goes back to the menacing villain point we brought up in number 3, but if you thought the overabundance of flashbacks was bad, the conclusion to this game was even worse. After defeating Dark Beast Ganon with a game of Link's crossbow training, Zelda and Link are reunited by not hugging, crying, or any form of affection really, and the game just ends. Okay, there's also a post-credit scene that's kind of sweet, but man, this is just weak compared to the other endings of Zelda games. Have you seen the ending to Skyward Sword? It's so good! This is why I'm glad we're getting a sequel to this game. There is so much more to tell in the world of Breath of the Wild, mainly because the story in the last game just left so much to be desired, and I think the developers agree with us on this matter.
It seems that the development team for this game had many ideas that they wanted to implement, but couldn't due to time constraints after focusing mostly on the gigantic open world of Hyrule. Given how much work was put into this vast world, it's no wonder the rest of the game was lacking in its story, dungeons, and soundtrack. But now that they've nailed the open world design, the sequel might just include what was missing in the first game. Think of the Breath of the Wild sequel as a second chance to right the wrongs of the game that was already a masterpiece, and as a result, create the ultimate Zelda game.
Oh, you just gave me goosebumps.
TMI, dude. Anyhow, if you enjoyed today's video and you liked my co-hosting abilities, maybe think about checking out my brand new Breath of the Wild theory that Joey just so happened to help me out on. Thanks again for having me on, by the way, man.
Awesome. Now if you'll excuse me, I'm gonna try and pet my doggy. No! Hey guys, thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, click that thumbs up button as it really helps me out. And if you are new, subscribe and hit that notification bell to know when I upload a new video. Special thanks to Stephanie for supporting me on Patreon as well. Until next time, this is FerrisWheelPro, and I'll see you on the next ride.